There's no written definitive history of the relationships between Telechron, Revere, and General Electric. All of the information you are about to hear has been assembled over the years through tidbits of information picked up here and there, old catalogs, and through clues picked up from the clocks themselves. It's pretty much like trying to put pieces of a jigsaw puzzle together, but we don't claim to have all the pieces. It would be easy to start with the Revere Company in 1928, but the success of Revere can only be attributed to the Telechron Company over a decade earlier. Electricity in the very early 1900s was very much underdeveloped. Henry Warren, the founder of Telechron, was greatly responsible for how we receive electricity today. His master clocks installed in power companies starting in 1916 ensured a proper delivery of electricity at exactly 60 cycles per second. By 1925, with his motors now keeping perfect time, electric clocks began to hit the market. Two major companies followed Warren's progress with great interest. The first was General Electric. General Electric acquired 48% of the company in 1917. They obtained full interest in 1943 when Henry Warren stepped down. General Electric would use Telechron movements in all their clocks. A second company was the Herschede Clock Company. Walter Herschede began to see the wisdom of electric clocks early on. With the help of Telechron rotors and coils, he developed an electric Westminster with a pendulum backup. If the power failed, a small spring on the pendulum would keep the clock going for a good 24 hours. Still, not 100% convinced of this new electricity thing to run clocks, Walter turned the risk of embarrassment over to a new company. He began the Revere Clock Company in late 1927. Keeping his prized Herschede Clock Company separate from Revere would protect his good name just in case electric clocks didn't catch on. Production started in 1928. Little did he know that Revere would go on to become one of the most famous names in electric Westminster clocks. As of this recording, we have worked on many 1928 Revere clocks. We have yet to see one with an earlier date. Some people claim that Revere started earlier than 1928, but we've seen no evidence to support this. The early clocks made between 1928 and 1930 were clearly not made for the average Joe making $12 to $20 per week. The R405 shown cost $105. You can compare this pretty much to buying a hi-fi VCR back in 1979 or 1980. This type of VCR, which you can get for around $50 today, was a $500 item back then. If you wanted to be the first on the block to own one, you had to dig deep in your pocket for the money. But, just like VCRs, things changed and prices began to drop. Even though General Electric owned 48% of Telechron at the time, the relationship between GE and Revere remains a bit sketchy. It's a well-known fact that General Electric used Telechron clocks, doing nothing more than sticking their name on the front dial. The prefix AB was used in model numbers to signify a Telechron clock under the General Electric name, but this prefix was eventually dropped. We do know for a fact that General Electric was in some sort of a partnership with Revere. It's apparent that GE was not capable of, or not interested in designing or making their line of clocks. During a 10-year period, 1930 to 1940, it was Revere that provided clocks made under the General Electric name. Although Revere had their share of independent designs, some Revere clocks were identical to clocks carrying the General Electric dial. Despite their high cost, Revere sales during the first 3 years was a great success. 1930 marked an unmatched pinnacle in Revere history with a record-breaking 102,600 movements being produced and never matched again. This success was short-lived. Not only did the Great Depression strike, but the novelty of electric clocks began to fade. It was tough enough to buy a $100 clock on a $20 a week paycheck, but nearly impossible in 1931 when families couldn't even afford to buy food. There was no production figures available for 1931, and 1932 showed a mere 5,700 units being produced. It's quite possible that remaining 1930 inventory was carried into 1931 and new production was ceased. We classify this period between 1931 and 1940 as the dark period of Revere's history. We have Revere sales catalogs right up to 1930 and then a void right to 1941. Apparently, General Electric must have been producing some sort of catalogs during the latter part of the 1930s, as many of their clocks were still tagged with model numbers and names. Yet, you will find many Revere clocks lacking any type of ID whatsoever. The three clocks shown above are perfect examples of what we consider uncatalogued. Now, the production figures shown are not for that particular clock. Those numbers are the total number of movements produced for that year. Keep in mind that those movements were spread between Revere, General Electric, and possibly by now Herschede clocks. None of the clocks produced during this era had any type of ID stamped on them. Now, we can't tell you exactly why, but we do have theories. First off, we know for a fact that many models were made for 1 year and not carried over into the next model year. That would mean that very few of each style was produced, possibly as little as 500 clocks. Since this was too few to mass market, catalogs were never produced. Kind of look at it this way. If you only had 100 widgets to sell at $90 each, would you spend $2,500 to produce 100,000 flyers to advertise them? Probably not. Chances are these clocks found their way into retail stores by salesmen, and it was on a first-come, first-served type of thing. If a retailer sold his clock, odds were high that he would not be able. In any case, we classify any of these uncatalogued clocks made during these low production years as scarce to rare. Clock production began to pick up in 1940, and a distinct split between GE and Revere began. General Electric still used the tried and proven Revere movements, but it is unclear whether or not GE produced their own cases. In 1940, GE introduced the Joy, while Revere introduced their famous and most popular R913. Similarities are striking. Both used the same oval bezel and glass. Both had the same exact hands. Both used the same exact nickel chime rods on the same exact cast iron base. However, the GE clock retailed for $17, while the Revere retailed for $24.50. Quality on both were equal. It was in 1943 that Henry Warren stepped down and GE quickly took full controlling interest in Telechron. Clearly, GE was targeting the everyday folk while Revere was still capitalizing on its name. GE produced simple designs during the 1940s. Revere did the same, but still produced some elaborate models costing as much as $60 to $75. The R913 remained as one of Revere's most popular designs and would later carry both the Revere and Herschede names right up to the very end. With the introduction of both the atomic age and the space race, the 1950s ushered in a new and exciting look in clocks. Both Telechron and GE introduced new styles of regular household clocks reflecting the style of the decade, but the end was clearly in sight as cuts were being made in quality to keep prices down. Wood was being replaced with plastic. Glass crystals were also being replaced with plastic. Even the movements were being scaled back as less brass was being used and gears were becoming thinner. Ironically though, neither GE or Revere made cuts on the quality of their Westminster clocks. The quality of a 1955 Westminster was identical to one made in 1940, but how long could that last? Battery-operated movements were introduced in the early 1960s, and the death of electric was at hand. The famous Telechron rotors were the first to suffer. The famous brass Revere movements driven by the workhorse B-rotors were discontinued. As a replacement, Revere designed a much smaller, cheaper steel movement driven by the H-rotor as shown in the picture. The H-rotor was a dependable rotor developed in the mid-1930s that up until this point was only used in time-only clocks produced by Telechron and General Electric. Even though Revere never stooped to using plastic in their cases, one could easily feel the difference in the thickness of the wood veneers being used. But things got worse by the end of the 1960s. Herschede was the first to bail out in 1967, selling to a group of businessmen. By 1972, finances were so bad, Herschede merged with other companies to form Arnold Industries Incorporated. We believe it was at this time that Revere production stopped. Herschede officially ceased all clock production in 1984 and the factory closed forever. Things weren't going all that well for General Electric either. Feeling the financial pinch, General Electric made further cuts. In addition to making some of the most horrid-looking clocks of the century, GE quit using the H-rotor in their clocks. These rotors were replaced with the very inexpensive smaller S-rotors, and movement quality was reduced to accommodate the lower torque that these rotors produced. Finally, in 1979, General Electric sold all of their interest to the Timex Corporation.